think we're going to start with a tough one here on you today. Let's just talk about podcasts in general, since that was a great topic you brought up. And,
Okay.
I mean, it's new for me, kind of kicking it off officially this year, but I heard you're doing something as well through some of your own initiative and, being the chief morale officer. I know you've done that for years, but how are you turning this into something?
Tony, again, for your listeners, so Tony and I, what we're kind of skipping over here a tiny bit is at this last conference we attended, I don't know, 1,500, 2,000 people there. And on the side, when all the people weren't swooning because of the man in the pink suit, Tony North,
That's right.
he and I had a conversation about this podcast. And part of that conversation was you shared in a very vulnerable way, hey, Kirk, I've been thinking about this for a long time. And then right now you gave me a little more background. I did something in 2014, but I've been thinking about for a decade. Well, I've been an MC, I've been a speaker for 20 years, and podcast, probably kicked off a decade ago. I don't know.
Yep.
But it just seemed like that was something other people did.
That's right.
Right. And they must possess some kind of knowledge that I don't have. Not only that, but I'm like, it just seems like I don't know, because we don't know what it is, we create all these barriers around it so we can excuse ourselves from actually taking, right? And then you've got the imposter syndrome, which is like, who am I? What do I really have to say? Which I'm 25 years into this, I still sometimes in front of a group, I'm going, do I really have something to offer them? Right?
Right.
So and like this dark voice comes in, you're like, no, shut that down.
That's right.
But so in a similar way, I've had thoughts about it. I've had a couple buddies go do it, people really close to me. We all know people that do it, but when you have someone like they start their own podcast and they're telling their story and they're having guests on, and I love one-on-one interviews. I love all that stuff, but not cameras and recording that I had to someone, I imagine all these things that came with it.
Right.
When really it's recorded on Zoom, posted on YouTube, edit if you want to.
That's right.
But that's not what I thought. So I just kicked it down the road.
That's right.
Kicked it down the road. And finally, and then COVID, a couple of years where we were all kind of trying to figure out what I was, because I make my living in front of people. I'm not as tech savvy as you, so I couldn't sit home and go, oh, let me diagnostic your thing and help you with your systems and process. I don't have that skill. So I did some Zoom stuff, some Zoom training, but there was no joy in it. The joy in my life comes from really being in the room with people. At least that's how I defined it. Right. So I kind of pouted about that, and pouting's not a productive strategy for self-help or self-care.
That's right.
And then finally, I started rebuilding momentum.
Okay.
And then in the process of rebuilding momentum and re-engaging in growth, and I began to say, you know what? What's really stopped me from doing some of these things, including a podcast, was I thought I had to know stuff. But I read that great book by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy called Who, Not How.
Right.
And that we're all predisposed in America to saying that we've got to figure it out. We got to bootstrap this thing.
Yeah.
It's such a limiting belief. In other words, but you don't need to know how to do anything. You need to know someone who does know how to do that thing. And then you do the thing you do well and pay someone else to do the other stuff. But I was like, well, I got to figure this out. I don't even know what to ask these people. Right. So all those stuff that just became an excuse. So I, like you, laid it down. I registered the Initiative Institute because, and I don't know how I don't want to sound all arrogant and everything, but I'm the world's leading expert on the principle of initiative.
Right.
And the reason I am is because, not just because I say I am, it's probably because nobody else wants it. No one else has claimed that space.
Right.
No one else has written more books about it. No one else has published more books about it. No one else has been asked to talk more about it. And I never said to become the initiative guy, but I realized, you know what? The Initiative Institute, if I could help people, on this podcast that I'm doing, if I could just talk to Tony and talk to Randy and talk to Susan and talk about, right, when was that moment you took initiative?
Right.
Because we thought about it. But initiative is when we do something that we know needs to be done without being asked to do it.
That's right.
That's when life happens. That's when change happens. That's when progress happens. That's when innovation, that's right. Thinking about something isn't innovation. Doing something with our thoughts, that's innovation. That's initiative. That's where everything begins. And I thought, if I can talk to people about what stopped them and why they acted, and we can unpack that just a little bit, maybe in that unpacking, there might be a nugget or two that would inspire other people to say, you know what? Like Tony, like Kirk, like Deb, like Bob, it's time for me to stop thinking about something and start doing something. And so
Yeah.
the purpose of the Initiative Institute podcast is just that. I don't want to interview the rich and famous. I want to interview everybody who took initiative in their life or who's willing to talk about a time they didn't and regret it and how it changed them when they decided to.
I love that.
That's probably, I probably over answered, but there it is.
You answered perfectly. This is why, listen, we had talked about this earlier. You're an inspiration to me.
Uh,
You flew up here in Seattle, did our Seattle HDI chapter before COVID. And, I've watched you as an MC forever. And now I do MCing for a couple of conferences myself. And you inspire me to do so many things. So just so you know, that's helped me have the initiative. One thing that you shared that I really love, though, which I think is important to our community. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, you can use the QR code right now to subscribe to Tech Talk Tony. Um, but here's the thing. I remember in 1991 when I got my first tech job, and I had this supervisor, Penny Longhorn. She was great. And
okay.
she actually, had a team of people that did phones. And I started with phones before I got into computers, did
Right.
phones and computers and networks and, all this stuff. And she was not technical at all. She wasn't technical at all. And so I came to her, I was a technical guy, my first job. And I said, so how can you be the supervisor to manage all of us? And she said almost what you said, but this was in 1991. Listen, what I learned is her note was, I actually learned that I didn't have to be the one to know all the answers. My job is to pull people together. And I'm not feeling threatened by other people that have more strength than me in networks or computers or technology. My skill is to just make us all work and let the people who have the expertise bring the expertise to the game when we have to apply it to a situation. And so my job feels complete when I pull everybody together. And so it's so true that people sometimes feel like they actually have to know everything. And I think it's important to recognize you don't.
Oh
You
my
know,
gosh. Liz Wiseman, a brilliant, brilliant lady. Her company is called the Wiseman Group, but
right.
her first book was called Multipliers,
Okay.
and her next book was called Rookie Smarts. But
Right.
essentially, she talked about in Multipliers. She worked at Oracle when they were before they became this global. Brr.
Right.
So she was there as an intern and just spent her career there, and then finally has her consulting. But she said Oracle's strategy for a long time was to hire the smartest people on the planet Earth and bring them to Oracle.
Mm,
But she
great.
said what she observed over time was that it's not the smartest person. Like, because some people walk in the room and they want everyone to know that I'm the smartest person in the room.
Right. Right.
Other people walk in the room and they help everyone else feel like they're the smartest person in the room.
Exactly.
Those are the multipliers.
Yes.
The people that can bring the intelligence that exists in the room to the forefront, and so
That's
the right, so they elicit all that. So that's emotional intelligence. That's that EQ over IQ.
That's
And
right.
so I think that's what your supervisor, right? She goes, no, I don't. I'm not threatened by this.
Right.
I'm fascinated by this, and I want to bring all that you have, and I know we can solve anything, right?
Yes.
I know we can solve anything. So yeah, lovely, lovely.
Powerful, very
Yeah.
powerful. And so, okay, well, listen, you get flying colors on that answer. So we're gonna test your skills out here
All
on
right.
this next one. One of the things, and which I love, you and I, by the way, when we get together, we share advice on different things. And like, for instance, we have different sayings that we've come up with, and you
Yes.
know, what stuck with us from some sayings. And I'm going to just hit one real quick. It's an old one, so a lot of people know it, but just to kind of get the conversation going, because I think there are certain sayings that are really good nuggets. And then there are other sayings that are, oh, that's just kind of funny. But like, know from whence you came. If you know from whence you came, there is no limit to where you can go, right? That's one of my favorite sayings. I've got it up on my wall, and it really helps, drive.
Okay,
Um,
well, hold on. I love that, but unpack it a little bit. I love
yeah,
what, and by the way, Tony, I love where you're going.
yeah,
So this idea of because there's a lot of pithy quotes out there.
it is
You
totally.
could doom scroll Instagram all day and
Yeah,
just little bits of wisdom, but you're talking about the wisdom that stuck, the wisdom that shaped the way that we show up, the way that we believe, the way that we behave, that kind of thing.
exactly,
So
exactly.
when you know from whence you came, you can go anywhere.
Yes. And
Unpack that. What does that mean to you?
so basically the idea, and this is the reason why it stuck for me, right? By the way, everybody's going to have their own saying that really
Yeah, no,
stuck
but
with them
no,
too.
this
They're
is
correct.
yours. I
And
want to know. Tell me.
yep. And so in this instance, I started as a juvenile in trouble. I started, I could not see me getting to this age at all, right? And so because I started and we didn't have money when I was a kid. There were things that were challenges in
Okay.
my background that I could not, see the destination to even being in a job for as long as I've done or traveling where I've gone. So when you feel like you came from this maybe smaller place, not in
Okay.
size, then the sky's the limit, right? The
Okay. Okay.
ocean is the opportunity. Everything
So
in front of you
so
is
you're so you're saying that looking back, like, never imagine you'd be here,
right.
then helps lower the barriers of disbelief that you could do anything else.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
so again, I think if we just took a pause at all these little pithy quotes and just kind of unpacked them like this. So
Yeah.
what is it? Why does this little piece of philosophy shaped or blessed your life? Well, because we can all put the bumper sticker on, and so that we're all seem wise. But what is it? Does this really drive you? Does this really inspire you? But when I think about where I've come
Yeah.
from, gratitude fills my heart. I never imagined I'd be here.
Right.
And let's not stop there. Let's not have fear. Say, well, but I probably can't do much more than this.
Right.
Let's say, well, listen, if the next 5 or 10 years takes is as amazing as the previous 5 or 10,
Right.
then my future is beyond imagining.
Exactly. Exactly.
In other words, I'm not at my threshold. I'm not at my limit.
That's right.
So the beautiful book about this again, this is another book I'd love called The Gap and the Gain.
Right. Right.
And in the gap and the gain, I wish I had a slide that I could pull up and share with your listeners. Maybe if this doesn't suck, maybe you can invite me back and we will.
That's right.
But Dan Sullivan, who's probably the number one entrepreneurial coach in the history of America, he's been up for 50 years. He's coached more entrepreneurs than any other person.
Right.
And then Benjamin Hardy's a PhD psychologist guy who went through his entrepreneurial coaching program and realized that Dan Sullivan was using psychological principles, although he didn't know he was,
Right.
in a way that was much more accessible,
Okay.
easy for people to understand, access, and adopt. And so together they began to collaborate and say, let's take this wisdom and put it in books. So the book is called The Gap and the Gain. And what
Okay.
Dan Sullivan observed,
Okay.
this comes back to what you just said. What Dan Sullivan observed was he said, entrepreneurs, so they come down, they say, well, here's my thing. I made $2.5 million. Let's set a goal for 5 million. We're going to double our revenue. He said, then they would double their revenue over some period of time.
Right.
But instead of celebrating that they doubled the revenue, they'd be like, my goal should have been higher. I could have got more. And then Dan Sullivan said over time, what he observed was no one was happy with what they got.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
There, and he said, I began to really, what was that? And he said, here's the thing, that we all imagine an ideal version of our life,
Yeah.
an ideal version with our partner, an ideal version of our relationship with our kid, an ideal version of where we are going to be financially, an ideal version of what a success looks like. He said, the problem with the ideal is that the ideal is like the horizon. You never get to the horizon. The horizon's always at it. You never reach the ideal.
Right.
It's always beyond, right? The ideal is the ideal. It's you strive towards it. It's a driver. It gives you focus. It can fuel you. But he said, then we start here, we make it to here, but the ideal's there.
There. Right. Right.
Then we focus on the gap.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I love
So
it.
the gap and the gain.
Right.
He said we've always got to measure backwards. So we start here, we get to here. That's the ideal. Always measure backwards. Well, I didn't make it the ideal, but I'm not where I was.
Right. Right.
Always measure backwards. Like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't get to the moon, but oh my gosh, I'm in orbit right now.
Right.
I'm a freaking satellite in orbit. Look where I was. I can't even, right? So that's what you're saying. So right, when we look where we were,
Right.
look where I am, right? The ideal keeps us stretching, but the idea is not to reach the ideal. And that's the problem. He said in America, it began in our culture with the framing. He argues it began with the framing. The founding father said, the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
Happiness is an ideal. You never get there.
Right. Right.
Oh, really?
Right.
That's flawed thinking.
That is.
That gets us looking like, well, yeah, I just got to keep chasing it. Well,
Right.
wait a minute. When you get